A pleasant good evening, Samoa, for the sake of our non-Samoan speaking audience. Pleasant good evening and welcome to another edition of our Torino program. Tonight, we have the great pleasure of welcoming our special guest on our show tonight. He'll be appearing on a couple of our episodes. It's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Peter Baofu. Dr. Peter Baofu is an American visionary and author of 144 theories and visions, with 178 scholarly books and many other numerous articles that he's written, and he's well known all over the world. He's been around the world on various television stations, and also his books and his scholarly writings are used on various universities around the world. It is a pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Baofu, to NUS TV this evening.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Okay, well, to start off, I thought I would just talk a little bit about yourself, and it's your opportunity just to tell the audience who you are and what you are about. And I've noticed that you've been all over the world on various television stations doing interviews. And I wanted you just to touch base on why is it important for you just to get the message out to people about yourself.
Yeah, you had mentioned some of my works already, so maybe I can just add a few more. I'm the author of 178 books so far in all fields of knowledge in relation to the mind, nature, society, and culture. That is, in all fields of the formal sciences, the natural sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. And I try to provide different solutions and visions, and I have provided more than 145 different new visions and theories of the human future in relation to the mind, nature, society, and culture. Not just for one culture, one society, and one specific group, but in the entire planet Earth. And that's why I have been in more than 127 different countries by now, and shall be more. So that is the global project that I'm doing, because I'm trying to provide solutions to global problems. And that's why it's so important for me to go to so many different countries. And as you just said, I was also interviewed on TV around the world in relation to some of the solutions that I propose to solve some of the global problems on Earth.
Wow. The word that comes to mind is genius. And we talked about the solution to global problems. Now, for a small country like Samoa, we are not immune from the global issues that are happening around the world. As you will know, when something happens in Europe or in America or wherever in the world, it also affects our small island nation. I want to touch base on identity politics, which is something that it's sort of stemming from what's going on in the US, with people going crazy about who they identify with. I'm sure I remember when Trump took office, there was a lot of Samoans also wearing the MAGA hats, and there were people disagreeing on social media, and everything sort of chaos sort of ensued. Do you see that that's part of the problem? Identity politics?
Identity politics is, of course, a major problem, not just now, but also in ancient time. In all human history, there's always an identity issue, even for the groups which are dominant, because they have to preserve their power. The identity issue is always become an issue, even if it's hidden in the carpet. But for those who are outside, of course, they also have an identity crisis because they want to break in. So yes, but in the case of the US now, we have a lot of different problems. Again, I'm a visionary about the entire planet Earth. I do not want to spend the whole time talking about the US. I'm a global thinker. I'm not narrow-minded in one country only. So I try to avoid some of this, which I have seen a lot in my school in the US, my American professors, for example, many of them are very narrow-minded, and I don't want to be like that. So I just want to steer the conversation away from you. I don't want to talk about the US all the time. I'm a global thinker. But just to answer your question very quickly, identity question, you have to be more precise. Now, what kind of identity do you have in mind? Are you talking about homosexuality? Or are you talking about transgender? Are you talking about reparation? Are you talking about what it means to be black or to be a woman?
Yes.
Are you talking about sexism?
Yes.
Are you talking about what does it mean to be white nowadays? I mean, what do you mean? I mean, each issue has a different solution, has different agenda, different interests. So I don't know what you mean by that. So if you can be more precise, then I will talk about it.
Yeah. So I wanted to touch, do you think that that's becoming a problem with politics now, having all those sort of far right, far left movements in a global standpoint?
Maybe I can help you steer away the conversation outside the US, even in Samoa. I know that homosexuality is not legal in Samoa, it's not allowed. And the same thing in some African countries. But I think that it's undergoing some changes. Let me give you an example. I think this will happen to Samoa too. I also noticed that people in Africa begin to talk a bit more about the question of homosexuality. And also in the Pacific Islands that I have been in, and even though it's still not legal, but people at least try to engage in the conversation about that more and more openly. So I think that is like a trend going on, that some of this issue become more and more spoken. So in that sense, yes, for some group, but I do think that there is some fundamental differences in terms of culture and society. Let me give you some example. Western society, especially in North America and Western Europe, they are much more individualistic. Okay. Some other cultures, let's say in Africa and also in the Pacific Islands and also in Asia, let's say Northeast Asia, they tend to be much more collectivist. So the question of identity here has to be answered in relationship to some of the cultures in mind. So if you are a culture which is very individualistic, the chance is that you will end up in some of the fights that you have seen in the US or in the UK or something like that. But if you are a much more collectivist culture, then some of the issue will be addressed in the way that you see in Africa or in Samoa or in China or something like that, or in Japan, for example, or in India. So it depends on the culture. You see that now it is boiling down to some of the values and beliefs that you have. It's not because there's something universal that you can point to and say, this is the universality or something that you have to follow, but because if you do that, you become the dictator yourself in the name of democracy. By the way, this is another way to answer your previous question. Some of the fundamental problems about democracy is that democracy is fundamentally flawed. It's not something that you can fix. It's fundamentally flawed in the foundation. You have to build a new house. It's not that I have a window which is broken, I just ask someone here to repair the window, okay? But there's nothing wrong with the foundation. Everything is fine, just that there's some wind, strong wind, a storm or whatever, you repair the roof. It's not repairable. Some of them are so fundamental at the root of the democracy. Then you have to build a new tree. Or plant a new tree. You have to cut off the tree or do something else to build a new house. That is what I mean. And that's why it sounds very ironic, but in a way it's not ironic. In many countries in the world that I have been in, and I just mentioned some of them, let's say in Africa, in Latin America, in the Pacific Islands, and in the Middle East, in South Asia and South Asia, you speak to many of them consider Western powers, in this case the US, they are the dictators themselves. I mean, that's very ironic. Now, but in Western mass media, they portray it as the free world, that the rest of the world admire. But you go to many of those countries, they have, I mean, look at Western Africa. I want to steer with the conversation again. A lot of Africans, I'm talking about black Africans, they are very tired, very resentful toward the French domination, not just the colonial, now post-colonial domination still. And they really want France to leave. And that's why Mali is a good example over here. Mali is trying to get out of it and even ask France to to withdraw the troops stationed in Mali. You see that people are getting very, very tired because it's not just 1 year or 2 years, it's already more than 100 years in some of those countries. They are getting tired of this. That's why I said there's another theory, not about democracy anymore,
Yes.
that's about international process. I have another theory of that. And that one is, I talk about the hyper empires, and I think that we are moving into that direction. It's the decline of the West and rise on the non-West, especially in this case China, and also India is coming next. But there's another theory now, not about democracy,
Yes,
but they are related.
Okay, interesting. Dr. Peter Baofu, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for availing your time to spend with NUS TV, and I'm sure our audiences, as myself, have, I've been intrigued, I've been educated, I've been enlightened, and I'm sure that our audience have felt the same. Thank you very much for being part of this discussion. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of our program.